So, meanwhile, let's talk a little bit about the New York Times. So the New York Times, about a year ago, tried to hire a tech reporter. This tech reporter, it turned out, was friends with some rather unsavory people on the internet, and people dug up her old tweets, and then the New York Times fired this person. The New York Times, however, has not fired a woman named Sarah Jeong. Sarah Jeong is their new tech person on the New York Times editorial board, and she has some pretty bad tweets. Now, as a person who's been targeted for old tweets, it is my opinion that old tweets should not end your career as a general rule unless they are a revelation to the person who hired you. So, for example, if I had a bunch of tweets 10 years old and somebody had hired me and they didn't know about my old tweets, like they hadn't been public fodder, they hadn't done their research or something, and then it came to light, then firing me would not be the end of the world. If, however, they knew what they were getting when they hired me, then they should not fire me over calls to boycott. They should not fire me just on a principled level over them making a bad decision. Like, the fault of the New York Times here is the fault of the New York Times. It's not Sarah Jeong's fault. She tweeted this stuff in the past 4 years, and the New York Times just didn't do its research, or if they did do their research, they obviously didn't care. So that's a little bit different from, for example, the Roseanne Barr situation, where ABC fully knew that Roseanne Barr was kind of a crazy person, but she then tweeted something new, and that new thing was something that, it's new information. Disney didn't have it when they decided to hire Roseanne. ABC didn't have it when they decided to hire Roseanne, and so that sort of changes the equation. Well, Sarah Jeong, all this stuff has been known, okay? And here's some of the stuff that she tweeted, and I'll explain why this matters. She tweeted, "Oh man, it's kind of sick how much joy I get out of being cruel to old white men." And she also tweeted this: "Dumbass effing white people marking up the internet with their opinions like dogs pissing on fire hydrants." Right? She's just a delightful, delightful person. And it's not just restricted to that. There are some old tweets that are now surfacing about cops, where she tweeted stuff like, "Oh boy, I sure would fight the cops with my guns. I wonder why black people haven't thought of doing that, huh? And let me know when a cop gets killed by a rock or a Molotov cocktail or a stray shard of glass from a precious, precious window." And says, "When homeless people can beat cops senseless and suffer nary a repercussion, then let's talk about accountability going both ways." So she's an execrable human. I mean, she seems like a bad person. These are not good tweets. But the New York Times knew all this when they hired her. So the New York Times came out and they defended her, which tells you something about the New York Times. I think it is good, by the way, that employers are not jumping to firing people based on social media mobbing. This lady is a bad lady, but I don't think that it is a good thing as a general rule for employers to start firing people based on the social media mob getting angry. Right? We've seen this from the left too many times to think that it's any better when it comes from the right. It's just not a good idea to have blowback on Twitter drive whether somebody can hold a job or not as a general rule. Okay, but the New York Times released a statement, and their statement is more telling about the New York Times than anything else, because as I say, a year ago, the New York Times fired somebody for doing exactly what Sarah Jeong did, except that she was perceived to be on the right. Sarah Jeong is perceived to be on the left, so she gets to keep her job. Here's what the New York Times said. They said, "We hired Sarah Jeong because of the exceptional work she has done covering the internet and technology at a range of respected publications. Her journalism and the fact that she is a young Asian woman have made her a subject of frequent online harassment. For a period of time, she responded to that harassment by imitating the rhetoric of her accusers." Okay, this is legitimately the worst excuse I have ever heard for why you would tweet racist stuff. That's really, like, people were tweeting racist stuff at me, so in imitation of them, I decided to tweet racist stuff back at them. Yeah, that's good. Good excuse. Well done, guys. And then the New York Times says, "She now sees that this approach only served to feed the vitriol that we too often see on social media. She regrets it, and the Times does not condone it. We had candid conversations with Sarah as part of our thorough vetting process, which included a review of her social media history. She understands that this type of rhetoric is not acceptable at the Times, and we are confident she will be an important voice for the editorial board moving forward." So several things can be true here at once. One, I don't think the New York Times should fire this lady. They broke it, they bought it. Okay, they bought it. They knew what she was when they hired her. They should bear the consequences. If you choose not to subscribe to the New York Times, you have every right to do that, and they should bear the consequences of their own decision-making. Two, does the New York Times have a double standard? You bet your ass they have a double standard. You bet your life they have a double standard. There is no question the New York Times has an insane double standard. Not only does the New York Times have an insane double standard, Sarah Jeong has an insane double standard, because it turns out Sarah Jeong loves social media mobbing. She's been part of it. Tim Hunt, you'll recall, is a former honorary professor with the University College London School of Life and Medical Sciences. He's a Nobel Prize winner in physiology and medicine, as well as recipient of the Royal Medal. Okay, he made a joke one time in a speech about how young women and young men shouldn't work in laboratories together because they tend to fall in love. How do you know this was a joke? Because he was specifically referencing the fact that he married his lab assistant, right? He who is a scientist in her own right. People took this as, well, he's saying women shouldn't be in the laboratory, which is weird since his wife is actually a very highfalutin scientist in her own right. He was basically mobbed out of a job. He had to resign his job. He was punished by all of the academies of which he was a part. And here's what Sarah Jeong tweeted at the time. Tim Hunt sad. Tim Hunt too sad to do science. Twitter criticize him, and he just start crying. So she's really a delight. And then there was Jeong's reaction to the firing of Benny Johnson, who now works over at the Daily Caller. A long time ago, Benny was caught up in a sort of plagiarism accusation, and Sarah Jeong tweeted out, lots of talented people never make mistakes, and they still have trouble finding jobs. F. Benny Johnson's redemption. Well, I mean, I think that we could probably apply that same logic to Sarah Jeong. And then she said this about Justine Sacco. You remember Justine Sacco? That's the woman PR executive who was on a plane and she was traveling to Africa and she tweeted something about getting AIDS. And by the time she landed, her life had basically been destroyed. She tweeted this bad joke about AIDS and suddenly she was out of a job. No one would hire her. She had been made a pariah all across the media. I mean, it was really insane. People were tweeting, has Justine landed yet? And this became a top trending Twitter hashtag because virtue signaling on Twitter is extraordinarily strong. Here's what Sarah Jeong tweeted about that. What I'm getting at is that what happened to Sacco was not that bad. And white America's obsession with her is deeply telling. So that wasn't bad either. It turns out that when Barry Weiss, a New York Times columnist, was mobbed for having suggested that the right was being mistreated online, Sarah Jeong was very upset about that. She says, is there anything more tedious than media navel-gazing over outrage mobs? Start paying attention to what's happening outside your Ivy League, New York City-centric circles. Look at how the pylons operate in other contexts and get some bleep perspective. She did a bad tweet. She got engagement for it, and then she didn't want to engage back. What exactly was Barry Weiss's bad tweet? Her bad tweet was, she said immigrants get the job done when she was talking about the daughter of an immigrant who went to the Olympics in ice skating. That was her bad tweet. And Sarah Jeong said she deserved everything she got. The discourse is not being harmed because of people questioning a bad ice skating tweet. The discourse started getting harmed with, say, the online death threats, etc. Once you've seen enough of these, you can also see that people tweeting at Barry Weiss is not a big deal, LOL. And Brendan Eich, I mean, it's over and over. She's been part of these social media mobs, urging them on, cheering them. So there is a fair bit of karmic justice to Sarah Jeong now being social media mobbed. Now, do I think, again, for the 11th time in the segment, do I think that employers should start firing people based on social media mobbing? I do not. I think it's a mistake. I think employers should only fire employees if they are feeling actual business blowback from the decisions of those employees made while in the employ of those employers. Okay, but this is not that. So I don't think Sarah Jeong should be fired. I think she should sit on the New York Times editorial board, and we should continue to characterize the New York Times as a terrible piece of garbage newspaper. I think that seems to me the fairest outcome here. That she should have to work there, after having criticized the New York Times for years, by the way, as being too right-wing. She should have to work there, and then we can all sit here and laugh at the New York Times for being stupid enough to hire somebody like Sarah Jeong.